My father died and left a letter confessing he had a secret daughter. Then my brother went behind our backs and changed everything. I'll tell you what kind of person my brother is first, because otherwise none of this makes sense. Marcus, my brother, not to be confused with anyone else's. Marcus is the kind of person who remembers your coffee order. Not just yours. Everyone's. He remembered our elderly neighbor Mrs. Patton took 2 sugars and oat milk, and he'd bring her a cup on Saturday mornings without being asked, without mentioning it, without needing her to know it was a kind thing he was doing. He coached youth basketball for 3 years with no pay. He called our mother every single Sunday without fail, even during the years when calling our mother felt like voluntarily putting your hand in a blender. He is genuinely, constitutionally good. The kind of good that isn't performance. The kind that just is. I am not that kind of person. I'm fine. I'm functional. I love the people I love and I try to do right by them most of the time. But I've always known, in the specific way younger siblings know things, that Marcus got something I didn't. Some gene or early experience or alignment of the universe that made kindness his default setting instead of something he had to remember to do. I'm telling you this so you understand that what I'm about to describe isn't a story about a bad person doing bad things. It's a story about a good person who made one decision, maybe the most human decision imaginable, and how it unraveled everything our family had quietly built on top of a lie we'd all agreed, without ever saying so, to keep. Our father died 14 months ago. Gerald Okafor. 67 years old. Heart attack, sudden, on a Wednesday morning in the kitchen of the house we grew up in. My mother found him. I don't talk about that part much because I think it belongs to her. Dad was not a simple man, but he presented as one. Quiet, steady, showed up to everything, fixed things around the house, grilled on weekends, watched the news with the volume too loud. He worked for the same logistics company for 29 years. He drove a sensible car. He did not talk about his feelings, but he expressed them in the specific language of practical care: a full gas tank when you visited, grocery bags already packed when you left, an envelope of cash on significant birthdays that was always somehow exactly the right amount without you ever knowing how he'd calibrated it. He left a will. Of course he did. He was that kind of man. Everything organized, everything documented. The house to my mother. His retirement account split evenly between Marcus and me. A small amount to his church. Straightforward. Clean. Exactly what you'd expect from him. What none of us expected was the letter. His lawyer, a quiet man named Patterson who'd apparently known our father for 20 years, called us in about 3 weeks after the funeral. My mother, Marcus, me. Sat us down in an office that smelled like old carpet and told us that in addition to the will, our father had left a letter. Sealed. Addressed to the family. To be opened together. My mother held it for a long time before she opened it. I remember thinking it was going to be something tender. Final words. A list of things he'd never said out loud. Something we could cry over and frame. It was not that. The letter was 4 pages, handwritten in my father's careful, unhurried script. It started with "Love." It genuinely did. The first paragraph was warm in a way that made my throat close, and then, on the second page, it became something else entirely. My father had another child. A daughter. 31 years old. Her name was Simone. She lived in Atlanta. Her mother, a woman named Diane, who had apparently been briefly in my father's life before he met my mother, had raised her alone, with minimal contact from my father after the first few years, though he had contributed financially in a quiet, consistent way for most of her life. He'd known about her the entire time. He'd chosen, with what the letter described as great shame and greater cowardice, not to tell us. The letter was an apology. A thorough, genuine, clearly long-considered apology. It was also, whether intentionally or not, an instruction. He included Simone's contact information, said he hoped we might find a way to know her, and said he understood completely if we chose not to. My mother put the letter down on Patterson's desk and didn't speak for a very long time. We drove home in separate cars. That night, my mother sat at the kitchen table and I sat across from her and Marcus sat beside her and nobody said much of anything that was real. We said practical things. We said we don't have to decide anything right now. We said this doesn't change who he was to us. We said things that were probably true and also completely insufficient. Before I left, Marcus hugged our mother for a long time in the doorway. I hugged her too. It felt thin. In the car on the way home I called my husband, Daniel, and told him what had happened. He said all the right things. I cried in a way I hadn't cried since the funeral, which surprised me, because I thought I'd been sad about my father dying. I was only then realizing I'd also been sad about a version of my father I was only now discovering didn't fully exist. For about 6 weeks, we didn't discuss Simone. My mother didn't bring her up. Marcus didn't bring her up. I didn't bring her up. We moved through the practicalities of grief and estate and the 1,000 administrative tasks that follow a death, and Simone existed in the room with us the way a word does when everyone is carefully not saying it. I want to be transparent, during those 6 weeks, I looked her up. Instagram, LinkedIn, every available surface. She was a landscape architect. She had her father's nose, our father's nose, in a way that was immediately, viscerally obvious. She had a dog. She posted about hiking. She looked like a normal, complete person living a normal, complete life who happened to share DNA with a man she'd apparently barely known. I felt something looking at her photos that I couldn't name cleanly. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something more like vertigo. Like the floor had shifted 3 inches and I was still walking as if it hadn't. Marcus called me on a Sunday, his usual call mom day, which he now split to also call me, and said he'd been thinking about reaching out to Simone. I asked him what he meant by reaching out. He said he'd been thinking about sending her a message, introducing himself, acknowledging what their father had written. I said, Marcus, Mom doesn't even know how she feels about this yet. He said, I know. But Simone lost him too. She lost a father she barely got to have. And nobody's thought about that. And there it was. That thing he does. That genuine, uncomplicated extension of empathy to the person in the room who wasn't being considered. I recognized it immediately, and I also, in that moment, resented it in a way I hadn't expected. I told him I thought he should wait. That we should do this as a family or not at all, that reaching out individually, without consulting Mom, felt like a unilateral decision that wasn't his to make. He was quiet for a moment and then he said, You're right. I'll wait. He waited 11 days. I found out he'd contacted her through my mother. Simone had apparently written back. And then they'd exchanged several messages. And then this is the part that broke something open. Marcus had told our mother about it himself, directly, before I found out, because he didn't want her to hear it another way. My mother called me on a Tuesday evening. She was not hysterical. She was something quieter and harder than hysterical. She said, Your brother has been talking to that woman. I said I'd call her back. Then I called Marcus. He answered on the second ring, which meant he'd been expecting it. You said you'd wait, I said. I know. You said you'd wait and you did it anyway. I know, Ade. I'm sorry. She sent me a message first. She'd found me. And I couldn't just not respond. I asked why he hadn't told me she'd reached out. Why I'd heard it from Mom. Why, in all the conversations we'd had in the 11 days between his promise and this phone call, he hadn't once mentioned it. He didn't have a clean answer for that. Here's where I need to be honest about my own part in what happened next. I was angry at Marcus. Legitimately, I think. He'd made a commitment and broken it and managed the fallout in a way that left me in the dark and left my mother blindsided. Those are real things. But when I called my mother back that night and we talked for 2 hours, I said some things I shouldn't have. I said Marcus had always had a savior complex, that he collected broken things and called it generosity. That his reaching out to Simone wasn't really about Simone, it was about Marcus needing to be the good one, the bridge builder, the one who handled the hard thing with grace so everyone could admire him for it. My mother listened. She didn't agree or disagree. She just listened and said in that particular way she does. What I didn't realize, what I found out 3 weeks later, was that she'd apparently told Marcus, in some form, what I'd said. Not word for word. But enough. Marcus didn't call me for 2 weeks. 2 weeks is nothing in a normal friendship. In 14 years of him calling me every Sunday, 2 weeks was enormous. I noticed it by day 4. By day 10 I'd drafted and deleted 6 texts. By day 14 I called him. He answered. He was polite. He was warm in the surface way people are when they've made a decision to be civil before they're ready to be close. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing. I asked about his wife, his kids, his team season. He asked about Daniel, about work. It was the most excruciating phone call of my adult life. At the end of it I said, "Are we okay?" And he said, "I don't know yet." We had it out eventually. Properly. In person, at his kitchen table, with his wife Kezia quietly absenting herself to another room in the tactful way she has. He told me what our mother had relayed. I didn't deny it. I told him I'd said it in a moment of anger and that I'd been wrong about the motivation, even if I'd been right that he'd overstepped. He said he appreciated that. He also said, and this is the part I've been sitting with, that it wasn't the first time I'd reduced his kindness to a character flaw when it inconvenienced me. That I'd been doing it, in small ways, for years. That every time he did something I found excessive or presumptuous, my first instinct was to find the selfishness inside the generosity, because it was easier than sitting with the fact that he was just built differently than me. I started to argue. Then I stopped. Because he wasn't wrong. I'd spent 34 years being the sibling of a genuinely good person, and somewhere along the way I'd turned that into a quiet competition I'd decided to win by disqualifying him. If his goodness was really ego, then I wasn't behind, I was just more honest. If his empathy was really performance, then my detachment was just realism. I'd built a whole internal narrative that made my limitations into clarity and his virtues into vanity. Sitting across from him in his kitchen, I couldn't hold on to it anymore. Simone came to my mother's house for Thanksgiving. Not a big production, it was just the family, Marcus's kids running around, Daniel helping in the kitchen, my mother in her usual position of coordinating everything while pretending she isn't. Simone drove up from Atlanta. She brought sweet potato pie. She had our father's nose and his way of going still when she was listening, really listening, which I recognized so suddenly it knocked the breath out of me for a second. We didn't have a movie moment. There was no tearful embrace, no instant sisterhood. We talked, carefully, the way adults do when they're feeling out something new and fragile. She was funny in a dry way. She asked thoughtful questions. She didn't push. At the end of the night, when she was leaving, she hugged my mother. My mother held on for a moment longer than necessary. Nobody said anything about it. I drove home and told Daniel it had gone okay. He asked what okay meant. I said I didn't know. Better than I expected. Not as hard as I'd feared. Not a resolution, not a beginning, just a door that was no longer completely closed. He said that sounded like progress. I think it was. My brother and I are fine now. Better than fine, maybe one of those relationships that gets stronger specifically because something broke and you chose to repair it instead of walk away. We don't talk about that conversation at his kitchen table very often. We don't need to. It lives in how we talk now, a little more directly, a little less carefully. He calls every Sunday. I pick up every time. My mother is still processing. I think she will be for a long time. Grief and betrayal and love don't follow a schedule, and she is a woman who does things in her own time without apology. I've stopped expecting her to arrive somewhere on this. I just try to show up. Simone and I texted twice last month. Nothing significant. She sent me a photo of a landscaping project she was proud of. I told her it was beautiful, which it was. My father was not who I thought he was. He was also exactly who I thought he was. Both of those things are true, and I've stopped trying to make them resolve into one clean feeling. I think that might be what growing up actually is. Not the moment you stop being surprised by people, but the moment you stop needing them to be one thing. I don't have a question. I just needed to write it down somewhere it could exist outside of me. If you've navigated something like this, a family secret, a sibling rupture, learning something about a parent after they're gone, I'd genuinely like to hear how you held it.